All right, great. Let's get started today. We're going to talk about the changing COVID-19 and the impact on all of our lives. And I want to thank all of you all for attending. All the information here that I'm going to use will be on the website AskDrV.us. We've set it up there so there's links and you can download almost everything that's shown here. And you can also tweet me at AskDrV_US. As many of you know, I'm an emergency medicine physician, treated COVID patients, and this is my fourth pandemic now. And so the goal really is to really get a plan and get us all through this. So the presentation is going to be 10 to 15 minutes. Then after that, we're going to go straight to Q&A, and normally we take the written questions first. And then we take any questions by live if we can. The questions that we take are either in the chat box, which is down at the bottom, or at the Q&A. So everyone is in listen mode during the presentation, so let's get started. The intention for the webinar is to keep everyone informed on COVID-19 science so they can keep themselves and their family healthy. The outcome is that people are motivated to really think and look and create an action plan, or adjust an action plan, or improve upon an action plan. And you may have an action plan for your family, for yourself, or you may actually have an action plan for a broader community that you represent if you are involved in a community organization or a homeowners association or a union or something like that. All right, let's get started. The CDC Director, Robert Redfield, said that we could drive the pandemic into the ground if everyone wore a mask for 6 weeks. We have certain areas now that are beginning to look at shutting down. They may have opened up a little bit too aggressively. The CDC said 1 or 2 months, if everyone wore a mask, we could actually really put this into the ground and actually have this infection under control. So one of the things that I always say to people is, like, we have to really look at what is the thing that we're resisting that'll actually really make a difference, right? Otherwise, we wind up kind of smoldering and dealing with this where we're not really open and we're not really closed, and hospitalizations and infections continue, and you know, your ICUs are chronically overrun, and the death count continues. This is Peter Zai, and he is the creator of the N95 mask. And he actually put out a report with what he felt was his recommendation. So I figured, since he has the patent for the N95 mask, what does he say about masks? So his recommendation was to purchase 7 masks, either an N95 or a KN95 mask. I actually put here, this is, the left is eBay and the right is Amazon. So this is basically, they were anywhere from you know, $1 to about $3 each. He said to actually purchase 7, so you have 1 for each day of the week. And then when you get done with it on a Monday, you hang it up. And then the next day you use your Tuesday mask. And then at the end of Tuesday, you hang it up. And his thought was, you know, with hanging it and letting it sit for a week, that really is more than enough time for any virus that gets on your mask to be deactivated. And that these 7 masks could then be rotated, and actually the purchase of 7 masks would be good for about 5 to 6 months. To wear a mask or not wear a mask, I just want to show here what the difference is. If you have a COVID-19 carrier that doesn't know they're a carrier on the left-hand side, and you have a healthy person on the right-hand side. If the healthy person wears a mask, now in real life you don't know who's who, but if the healthy person wore a mask, the transmission is 70%. If the COVID-19 person wears a mask, the transmission goes down to 5%. And if both people wear a mask, the transmission probability goes down to 1.5%. So it does make a dramatic difference when all people are wearing a mask. We're going to have Gary Carter on Thursday talk a little bit more about all of the different types of masks. I just showed a couple of them here. The Spirion half respirator mask is about $100. That's in the upper left-hand corner. That is an N100 mask. blocks out 95% of the particles. That N95 and KN95 masks are on the left lower corner. And then we have various homemade masks and the regular medical mask. And those, like I said, are normally more like 50 or 60% effective. So we all know now to respect COVID-19. It is a droplet, but also an airborne disease. It's found to be airborne with singing or exercise, and it stays on surfaces for long periods of time. 45 seconds of contact can lead to an infection. And basically, if 100 people get in contact with the disease, about 60 to 80% of them will actually get COVID-19. This compares to, if you're talking about influenza, only about 30 or 40% of them will get the disease. A little bit about droplet and airborne. Droplets are larger. They usually only fall about 3 feet from their place of origin. Airborne is smaller particles, and they actually can go out into the air a lot longer. Think about tuberculosis or measles. This actually shows it in a graphic way. That's how come when we actually first got recommendations for COVID-19, it was 3 feet or less. But now they're telling people to stay 6 feet apart and even possibly more because it could be airborne. So it seems to be what's happening is COVID-19 is a large particle, but when it separates into micro droplets, which then can be airborne, it's still infectious. So normally when something kind of breaks up into smaller pieces, then normally it's not infectious, but that is not what's happening with COVID-19. It's also becoming aerosolized, as I said, singing, instruments, and heavy breathing. We talked about the fact that you cannot tell if you have asthma. You cannot tell the difference between an asthma attack or COVID-19. So it's very important for people with asthma, if they have home nebulizer machines, not to use them if they live with other people. If you must use them, you can go to a garage or go outside on a deck. There is a device called a spacer, which actually works and delivers just as much medication as a nebulizer. And it can be used even with a small infant and has a mask associated with it. All right, I get a lot of questions around vaccines. So I wanted to talk about the vaccine process, right? And so since COVID-19 is a coronavirus, we had actually started a vaccine for the bird flu, which is also a coronavirus. So several of the steps in this process had actually been started, which is why we could actually come up with a vaccine faster. So one, there's exploratory phase, which is sort of like, how does the infection work? What are the key components that turn the infection on and off? There's the preclinical phase, which is where we tested in animals. That was all done during SARS. Then there's clinical development, where you give it to a small group of people and you just determine, is it safe or not? And sometimes you look at the immune response. Then phase 2 is you give it to a larger number of people, and it's usually a randomized trial. Then phase 3 is where you give it to thousands of people and you really get the safety, the efficacy, what are the side effects. Then there's a regulatory review and approval process. Then there is manufacturing, quality control, and distribution. So right now, there are about 80 different vaccines that are in the various levels of exploratory, preclinical, or phase 1, getting ready to go into phase 2. This slide is actually from about 2 months ago. So we now have some that are clearly in phase 2. And it actually goes into what sort of vaccines, what sort of vaccines are there, and they're color coded by the type of vaccines that we have. So the main 2 that you're going to actually hear about is Moderna. That is the one that is being produced out in Maryland, and they're doing it in conjunction with NIH. They plan to start 30,000 volunteers in July. That is So they started that this month. They said that they could possibly deliver, assuming that everything works, 50 million doses in a year. And what they're going to do is they're going to enroll. Now, this is 2 shots. So the thing about this this vaccine is you have to get 1 shot, wait a month, and then get another shot before you are fully vaccinated. There's also a vaccine that you're going to hear about with Oxford University and AstraZeneca, and that also, those 2 vaccines are probably in their latest stages. All right, so let's talk about indoor spaces, because the fact that coronavirus could potentially be airborne really makes a difference for these types of spaces: movies, churches, gyms, office spaces, and schools. So movie theaters, really not possible to do a movie theater at this point in time because you're going to be sitting in a movie theater for such a long period of time. There's no windows. You're in there with a lot of people. There's really no way to safely do a movie theater. Similarly with church, because of the singing and use of instruments and the call and response. I know a lot of churches have done a very good job with going to Zoom or going to some sort of video interactive services. Gyms. Now, you'll see varying responses as far as gyms. Gyms have also been found to be a way in which coronavirus spreads significantly. Some gyms are closed, others are putting up barriers so that people can exercise and do various things. I personally would recommend exercising outside. It is dramatically safer to exercise outside. Office spaces, you'll actually see near the end of the presentation where we sort of rank the risk of certain activities, but going to the office for a week actually ranks moderately high on the risk list. And that is basically because you're sharing, even if you have your own office, you're still sharing ventilation. And when you have airborne as well as droplet disease, airborne, you really have to be concerned about ventilation. Now, obviously, if people are working outside, that's a completely different risk strata, but when indoor office spaces can be problematic with large number of people. All right, this is what we're talking about mainly is schools. All right, so let me just say first that there's no country in the world that has opened up their schools for face-to-face schooling with the infection rate, the community infection rate that we have. So the countries that have opened up their school, they've lowered their community infection rates and then also put in various safeguards as far as school. This actually shows a school in South Korea where all of the desks have a 3-partition plastic piece that is used so that way, and all of the students are also wearing masks. The American Academy for Pediatrics actually put together a article. This is on the website, and this talks about school reopening and all of the various things that you need to consider. We're not going to go through everything, but I'm going to go through the various categories pretty quickly. So one, they talked about for pre-K, the importance of really putting kids in cohorts, and then that is the cohort that they actually go to school with, that is the cohort that they eat with, and that is the cohort that they exercise with. Utilizing outdoor spaces whenever possible and limiting the number of unnecessary visitors in a building. Elementary school, they kind of get to the point where, you know, kids should be able to wear face masks, have desks that are 3 to 6 feet apart. Again, use cohorts and outdoor spaces whenever possible. Secondary school, the suggestions were similar, except for they added no singing, no exercise, so choir, or if there's any sort of choir or gym where the kids are gym class, things like that, where there's indoor exercising. It's safest to do these activities outdoors and actually spread out. Special education, this is basically a disclaimer that says you really have to look at special education on a case-by-case basis. Some children will be able to wear a mask. Some kids will not be able to, and that for special education, it really has to be determined on a case-by-case basis. Buses, okay, so it encouraged looking at other ways of transporting kids if possible, if parents can bring kids to school. They also, again, looked at assigned seating by cohort. So you always sit at the same seat and you're always sitting with the same group of people. Drivers should be a minimum of 6 feet from the students. Minimize the number of people on a bus at one time. Maybe use more buses, shorter routes. Also making sure to keep the windows open. This is important for the bus as well as for the classrooms. Hallways, looking at doing a one-way hallway. So a hallway, maybe upstairs is going in one direction, downstairs is going in another direction. This limits the amount of people that actually get into close contact or bump into each other. So that's why the one-way contact is really important. They also looked at assigning lockers by cohort, staggering classes, and also using tape or physical guides on the floor to help. Playground. The playground is they looked at actually limiting the size of the number of students that go out at a time. When you see limiting the size, they're talking about 10 to 15 students in a class, or 10 to 15 students eating together, or 10 to 15 students on a playground. Similarly with meals, shortening the meal time so that way you can actually get smaller cohorts that then eat together and they always eat together. Also setting up tables outside so kids can, whenever the weather makes it possible, they can actually eat outdoors. Also having washing and hand sanitizing stations that children use before and after eating. Okay, so consideration on when kids should go back to school. The most important thing that you want to actually look at is what is your infection rate. So I sent out to everyone last week the coronavirus task force, which rated every county in the United States green, yellow, or red. If you're in a red zone, you have 1 COVID case per 1,000 people. So if you have 1 COVID case per 1,000 people, a lot of schools have 1,000 people in it. So if you have 1,000 people or 2,000 people or 3,000 people in a school, then you are going to have several COVID cases in that school, and it's going to spread like wildfire. So you really have to make sure that you're in a green zone if the kids are physically going to go back to school. If that is not the case, and also be in a state where they have contact tracing. Also, you want to look at what are the age of the kids, what's the maturity of your children. Are your children old enough and mature enough to really understand the significance of following these instructions? Then the other thing is, who do you live with? Is it just you and your children, or do you live in a multi-generational home with an elderly grandmother or aunt or uncle that also live with you? So these are all important things to really consider. So overall, what other countries have done is they've decreased their community infection rate first. So many states have gotten down to the point where they might have 1 case in every 10,000 or 1 case in every 20,000, and then opened up their schools, as opposed to 1 in 1,000. Decreased the class sizes. They've also removed public water fountains, provided protective gear for teachers, administrative staff, and students who couldn't afford it, so that everyone had an N95 mask. Everyone had hand sanitizer and things to clean their hands. They've installed more cleaning stations, and they've also done temperature testing. Alrighty, so just quickly, this actually is a COVID risk chart that was put together by the Texas Medical Association. I'm not going to go through everything on this list, but as you look at it, it sort of color codes things that are high risk. So red is working out at a gym, going to a movie theater, going to a bar, attending a religious service. Yellow are things like attending a backyard barbecue, shopping at a mall, sending your kids to daycare, working a week in an office building. Green is things like going to your doctor's waiting room, grocery shopping, playing golf. And lower than that is pumping gas, playing tennis, going camping, and getting restaurant takeout. And the lowest, and I think they put that in there just to be comical, is one is opening your mail at home. There's very little risk of getting COVID by that activity. All right, then lastly, this is actually what's actually some good news and actually very interesting. So this is a home COVID test. So there are now a lot of studies actually looking at this. This is almost like someone would actually at their own home check their blood sugar. It's almost like a blood sugar check machine at home, except for it does COVID tests. The little strip will actually print out the date and then will actually tell you if you're positive or negative. So it could be, we could see where if you want to go do something like go to a Broadway play or a music concert, then you've got to bring your strip, show that you were negative that day, and that's part of actually gaining entry into an event that might be higher risk. So this is actually shown really good. The early results are really good on this particular test, and it's a fairly cheap test. I think it's less than $5. So that's some of the good news. So I will now turn it over for some questions and answers.